Perfect. So, welcome everyone to the Association for Social Economics webinar podcast series. Throughout the series, we'll explore the profound and multifaceted impact of economics. This podcast series is sponsored by the ASE, whose mission is to foster research and publication centered on the reciprocal relationship between economics and the broader questions of human dignity, ethical values, and social philosophy. Each month, I get a chance to sit down and interview scholars in the field. I am your host, Iris Buder, and with me today, I have Dr. John Komlos, Professor Emeritus of Economics and of Economic History, University of Munich. He has also taught as a visitor at Harvard, Duke University, University of North Carolina, as well as in Vienna and St. Gallen, Switzerland. Born during the siege of Budapest during the last days of World War II, he became a refugee 12 years later during the famous uprising there and grew up in Chicago, where he received PhDs in both economics and history from the University of Chicago. His mentor was the Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Fogel, who suggested that he study the impact of economic processes on human biology. Dr. Komlos devoted most of his academic career developing and expanding this research agenda, which culminated in his founding of the field of economics and human biology, with the journal of the same name in 2003. Through that research program, he became a humanistic economist, realizing that conventional economics does not reflect well the way that the real economy functions. Since the financial crisis of 2008, he has been writing about current economic issues from a humanistic perspective. His textbook, Foundations of Real-World Economics, What Every Economics Student Needs to Know, currently in its 3rd edition, advocates for humanistic economics and for capitalism with a human face. Humanism means that the economy should work for everyone, not only for the select few, and the goal of economic policy should be to improve life satisfaction rather than increase output. The book has been translated into 5 languages. It implies that a kinder and more just capitalism is possible, embedded in a truly democratic society that enables people to live a more dignified life with less uncertainty, less manipulation, less stress, less often being taken advantage of, less conflict, and less fear that their lives could spiral out of control in the next recession. So thank you, John, so much for being here with us today.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you so
yes.
much.
Absolutely. We've gotten a brief glimpse of your background. So can you tell us a little more about yourself, really your background, and what motivated you to get into the field of economics?
I started out as a scientist in my early career, and then came 1968 and all the upheavals that went along with it, and that sort of made me think about the society and how society works in general. And I thought that maybe history would be a good place to look, and I worked in history for quite a long time. But then one of my professors got me interested in economic history, and I did my PhD in the economic history of the Habsburg monarchy. And that was quite interesting. And then I became interested in the history of human height, and that kept me going for 30 years, and found some very interesting cycles and trends. And it then led me to realize that neoclassical economics is how should I say it, is mistaken. It just doesn't give us the whole picture of how societies evolve. And then after the financial crisis, it became increasingly evident that mainstream economics has been discredited, and a new perspective is needed. And that's how I got into capitalism with a human face. There's a short history of my academic career.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know that you recently served as a guest editor for the Forum of Social Economics for a special issue titled Unemployment in a High-Pressure Capitalism of the 21st Century. So I've always been curious about how really special issues come about. So could you discuss that?
Sure. Well, I came to the realization that uh, unemployment, the official unemployment statistic, is misleading because the Bureau of Labor Statistics counts only about half of the people who are really unemployed, if you can believe that. So the unemployment rate is simply incorrect. And the reason is that they count someone who is part-time employed as though he or she were fully employed. Well, that's a non-starter. And then, according to them, people are unemployed only if the person looked for work during the last month. And that's very restrictive because there are all sorts of reasons why people wouldn't look for work in the last month. So so then I estimated the true unemployment rate and came to realize that it was usually about twice the official unemployment rate, and that's extremely important to to spread the word. So obviously, one would like to do a special issue on an issue on something like that. But then I also realized that the U.S. is a very stressful economy. People don't realize that people in Western Europe live under much lower stress levels. And of course, that creates a whole bunch of problems for the society. As you know, stress is not good for people for
Mhm.
biological reasons. So these two ideas came together, and the special issue became more or less reality.
Yeah, that's great. And so, speaking of social economics, from your perspective, how does social economics contribute to addressing present-day social challenges and issues, and what unique perspectives or approaches does it really bring to the table?
Well, social economics should demonstrate the mistakes of mainstream economics.
Mhm.
Okay, to show that mainstream, the emperor has no clothes, basically. Okay, and to this end, it should document how social institutions, norms, values, social relationships shape economic behavior and impact the society's well-being. The problem is that neoclassical economics disregards society. Okay, there's no society in microeconomics at all, and is based on methodological individualism. Okay, to such an extent that it uses representative agent models in macroeconomics. Okay, so it basically assumes society away. That's a crazy idea. In contrast, social economics takes an interdisciplinary approach, as it should, drawing insights from not only economics, but sociology, psychology, anthropology, political science, and history. And that's what I try to do in my textbook. Social economics should emphasize that human behavior is influenced by the complex interplay of social, cultural, psychological, and institutional factors.
Mm,
I could
absolutely.
go, I could go on, but I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll talk about it a little bit more further as well as we dive into more questions. And so specifically, so how do you think the principles of social economics could guide ethical business practices and influence the development of corporate social responsibility of initiatives?
Well, social economics should help companies operate in a socially responsible manner,
Mhm.
integrating social and environmental concerns into their business operations and interactions with stakeholders. Economists should emphasize that that the corporations, the responsibility goes beyond mere compliance with laws and regulations. and entails taking voluntary actions that contributed to the well-being of the society and the environment. Very important.
Yes, absolutely. And so we have briefly talked about your book. So you authored the book Foundations of Real World Economics. So could you describe what distinguishes your book from other, perhaps more mainstream economics textbooks?
Well, the important, well, I started with data. Okay,
Mhm.
so I am a data person, which means that I use the inductive method. Okay, I look at the data and make inferences from it rather than the mainstream textbooks, which make assumptions and use the deductive method. They start out by assuming that people are rational. Well, you're not going to get anywhere with that. That's not economics. I call that blackboard economics. It works well on the backboard, but not well where the rubber meets the road because people are not rational. Kahneman and the behavioral economics economists have proved that, and no psychologist, would say that people are rational. Occasionally, at some times, people can be rational or make rational decisions, but it's rather seldom because most of the time we're influenced by emotions.
Mhm.
We're influenced by our subconscious mind, uh, which Freud pointed out in 1905. So it's a long time to seep into economics, but I guess mainstream economics is pre-Freudian, which is very important.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's assumptions are a big thing, and then I'm in the interdisciplinary, just like social economists. Like for economics, mainstream economics, political science doesn't matter, or history doesn't matter, or society, as we pointed out.
Mhm.
So that's very important. And of course, they more or less disregard behavioral economics. They might have a chapter on it towards the end, which professors can skip to their liking. But the main point is that they are wrong, 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 and wrong again. For example, they start with adults. Their analysis start with adults.
Mhm.
Well, when do you enter the market? You enter the market as a toddler because you start consuming and you start influencing your parents. And not only that, the market influences the development of the personality.
Mhm.
So that mainstream economics overlooks the first 20 years of life. What kind of science is that this skips 20 years of formative years? And therefore, they assume that tastes are exogenous.
Mhm.
Well, maybe by the time you're an adult, tastes are exogenous, but they're certainly not exogenous when you're born.
Mhm.
Because you look at the various cultures and you see that people are very different.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's a really interesting point that I'm just like, you know what, that is so true. Like, yeah.
right, it's common sense.
Mhm.
I'm afraid that most of my criticisms are common sense. It's
Mhm.
just that makes it more difficult for economists to do their derivatives.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your book, I was looking through it, you have a chapter titled The Evidence. Markets are neither omniscient or no omnipotent. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Could you explain this concept to our listeners?
Well, markets are should not be relied on to deliver a good life. Okay, that's not the role of markets. So we have to oversee what markets actually do and make
Mhm.
a judgment whether they deliver the kind of life that we would like. Okay, so markets are not given by God. Okay, they're not natural. They're human constructs.
Mhm.
Okay, they're human institutions. So we should not honor them as though they were above our judgment. Markets are not morally neutral instruments for defining the common good. Okay, so that has to come from outside. What kind of a life do we want to lead? And if we delegate this important ethical and moral consideration to markets, we're going to be in trouble because that's not what markets are for. Okay, so that's the important aspect of that chapter, that we have to think about the common good. We have to think about ethics should be part of economics.
Mhm.
Okay,
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
have to come to the realization, what is a common good? What is the common good? And that the economy works for everybody and not only people who are born on the right side of the track.
Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I
Mhm.
came to this country as an immigrant, and I think that helps me to understand how difficult it is for someone who starts out at the bottom of the totem pole to claw their way up the ladder. And that's just a kind of social Darwinism that is not going to work well in the 21st century.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually being asked to do a podcast today as well about ethics and economics. So it's very interesting that you brought that up today, is that it's absolutely foundational to even
Yeah.
answering like the degree of government intervention. Like that's the foundation of like why do we have government intervention? Because we know that the market doesn't allocate, like things fairly, right? In that sense. So just
And
as
people are
simple
born
terms.
with people are
Yes.
born with privilege.
Yes, absolutely. And then it's up to, right, intervention to correct those things because the market will not do so on its own. So
Exactly.
just
And
to
then
think of,
the problem also is that they then claim that they're self-made
yeah.
individuals,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
Bill Gates, you
Hmm.
know, claims that he's self-made. Well, he made his billions for one reason and one reason only, and that is because, well, two reasons actually. Because his mother knew the president of IBM. That's one reason. And the second is that his parents were able to afford a school for him that had a mainframe computer back in the 1960s. How many people went to schools in the 1960s with an access to a mainframe?
Hmm. Yeah, our
Okay.
social position really is a key role in all of this. And that's why I think it's so important to look through the lens of social economics when discussing these issues. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, in what ways can educational institutions integrate, in your opinion, social economics into their curriculum to really help prepare students for a comprehensive understanding of economic system behaviors?
Well, discard mainstream textbooks. Okay. That would be a starter because what's in it is nonsense,
Hmm.
basically. From my perspective, and they've struck out. They've struck out with the financial crisis. They
Hmm.
struck out by making wrong inferences.
Hmm.
They said, back in the 80s, they claimed that trickle down economics would work, and nothing trickled. And it wasn't discredited.
Hmm.
They said that tax cuts would increase economic growth, and it didn't.
Hmm.
Okay, tax cuts created an incredible amount of inequality, which
Hmm.
gave the wealthy enough money to influence the political process. Deregulation followed, globalization followed, deregulation led to the financial crisis. Globalization led to millions of people being thrown out of their union jobs,
Hmm.
downward social mobility.
Mhm.
Was very is very difficult for people to take. And ultimately, economist mistakes led to the right-wing populist movement.
Mhm.
Okay, let's not forget that. So what educational institutions should do is to discard these books that are pernicious. That's the only thing
Mhm.
I can say about it, because they claim that globalization is going to be good for Americans.
Mhm.
Yeah, but which Americans? That they don't say.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's going to happen to the people who have been left behind? What are they going to do? They're going to just go away nicely and say, "Well, this is a democracy, so I deserve Walmart wages.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
deserve." Who's going to say I deserve Walmart wages because I have to compete with Chinese labor?
Mhm.
No, they're not going to say that. They're going to say those elites did not look out for my well-being. So the political process is going to go haywire.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, I struggle it with myself. I teach primarily microeconomics, and we're so ingrained to the way we teach, generally speaking, right? The microeconomic foundations and the theory, right? It's all so
It's all wrong.
mainstream.
It's all wrong.
And then, I mean, I bring in, my personal philosophies of social economics within that, but the framework that we're supposed to be teaching in order to prepare our students for graduate studies in economics is still, right, the mainstream framework. So that's my own internal struggle with
Well,
this.
everybody has to struggle with it.
Hmm.
It's a struggle
Hmm.
from the very get-go. But
Hmm.
how do we get out of that is very difficult.
It's very difficult
You have
indeed.
to convince your colleagues, your chairman, your dean. That's a major undertaking,
Hmm.
generally speaking.
Yeah, because
But
like,
you can always suggest to your students, here's another book that you
mhm.
can look at.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, I personally discuss it. I give them the framework, but we interject, other things. But like, I have to get them prepared for grad school in a way. But I'm like, and that's the thing. It's also where is the economic suppressions heading, right? Are they changing? Are they not? Right? I think that's the foundation behind this discussion too. Is that unless we change the whole
Yes,
profession, we're not going to
yes,
change what we can teach in that sense. So,
it's very
um,
difficult, very
yeah, it is
difficult.
very
But that's what
difficult.
I'm trying to push.
Hmm.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm trying
not
to push.
impossible, just difficult. Um, so my air of optimism there.
Thank
And
you.
you briefly touched on this before, but you really discussed the importance of behavioral economics, especially in your textbook, and how the concept of the Homo economicus really is extinct. So can you help expand on that for this podcast?
Sure, psychology is extremely important
Hmm.
because the economy begins in the mind and ends in the mind. Okay,
Hmm.
everything takes place in the mind because you have to decide, well, I'm going to buy something, right? And then once you consume something, the satisfaction ends up in the mind. So psychology is extremely important, and behavioral economics has concepts that are not included in the mainframe textbooks, like framing effects.
Hmm.
Okay, it's very important because the framing effects are used to manipulate people, and that's a very important aspect because whole economics is based on the idea that the individual can knows his or her best interest and can act accordingly. But once you are manipulated, and these big companies are able to buy or employ the best and the brightest psychologists to figure out how to entrap people.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Hmm.
and that's the foundation of a good society, is to protect people from that kind of manipulation, and that the whole demand and supply framework
Hmm.
becomes utter nonsense if you do not understand the extent to which people are manipulated by psychological means. Why are people doing things that are contrary to their best interest? Because they are entrapped, or the psychologists are able to figure out ways in which to make that person think that they are doing something for their own benefit, but actually benefit the corporation's profit line.
Yeah.
So psychology is really, really important. And of course, as I mentioned, it's very important to consider the first 20 years of life, because that's where people get hooked in many ways. And here
Mhm.
comes Pavlov. You've heard of Ivan Pavlov and conditioning. And these corporations condition children to choose their product.
Mhm.
Like McDonald's gives out toys. Well, what is that? That is a conditioning
Absolutely.
factor. So not only is economics pre-Freudian, it is also pre-Pavlovian.
That's very interesting take. Yes. Um,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I know you have an extensive research history. So can you just talk about the general areas of your research focus that you're involved in and really what motivates you to be involved in those particular areas of research?
Well, the rise of right-wing populism is very, very threatening to me. Okay, because I lived in a system. I was born under fascism in Hungary and then lived in communism, emigrated in order to live in a free country. The threats to democracy is very problematic for me psychologically. So uh, the rise of right-wing populism is very important for me. So I've been working on the insurrectionists, for example. I looked at where they live,
Mhm.
okay, because from where they live, one can infer what kind of a social status that they belong to, and it's very, very important for me, it was very important to realize I looked up 900 of them and where they lived, okay, and about 80% of them lived in lower middle class areas,
Mhm.
okay, where the median income or the per capita income was between $20,000 and $50,000 a year.
Mhm.
Well, this dovetails exactly with my belief that these are the people who've been left behind by this economy. Okay, because you're not going to have a good life in this country with $20,000 to $50,000 a year. You're not going to be able to even attract a partner.
Mhm.
You probably didn't get a lot of education. You probably don't have health care insurance. And you're probably struggling in your day-to-day existence. So for me, these kinds of projects are very important too. But not only because of the threat to democracy, but also it shows the mistakes of mainstream economics. These are not slight mistakes. These are not even mistakes. These are blunders. These
Mhm.
are blunders of historical proportions. Where's the environment in their thinking? Where is the stress level in their thinking? Where is the anger that is going to be generated by having to work at Walmart wages?
Mhm.
And this is the crucial question of our time. How are we going to resuscitate the economy so that it delivers for everybody, and not only for Jeff Bezos, who bought a few months ago a $450 million yacht.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, while the deplorables are attacking Congress. It's not a good society. You know, it's not a good society.
Mm-hmm. So you referenced your work, which was recently published in the BE Journal of Economic Analysis and Policy, which was titled Estimating the Socioeconomic Status of U.S. Capitol Insurrectionists. And we will link that article in our show notes. And so you
Thank you.
already talked about your findings a bit from that research article, but it was a very intriguing and just really novel article, in my opinion. So how did you come up with the idea even of estimating socioeconomic status of this particular group of individuals?
Well, I say it's very important because the rise of right-wing populism is very threatening. And
Mhm.
here are a bunch of folks who are arrested, and their place of residence is available
Mhm.
on the internet. So I'm a data guy, as I as I told you at the very beginning. So for me, it was natural, almost natural to, look these up. And once I did, I came to the realization that it is incredible. This is incredible. There's practically nobody who is in the upper middle class. There's nobody rich, nobody on the upper middle class. And that makes perfect sense because people who are doing well in this economy are not going to care,
Mhm.
about attacking the Congress. Why should they? They're doing well. But another thing that I might mention, that another group that is missing are the slum dwellers. Okay, there's practically nobody in there from the slums.
Mhm.
And that also is a reflection that the ultra poor are not politically active, generally speaking. They don't
Mhm.
have even the money, or they can expand the effort to go to Washington, D.C. So
Mhm.
that's another interesting realization. But how I came to it is that I've been looking at large data sets all my life, or collecting large data sets all my life. So it was a relatively natural thing for me to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And then you've already touched on this, but can you really explain the importance of this work and just your work in general in the greater context?
Well, I'm very disturbed by falsehoods. I
Mhm.
don't like the idea of a post-truth society. I don't like to lies are anathema to me. Okay, or living in a lie is anathema to me.
Mhm.
And I'm a great respecter of a person by the name of Richard Feynman, who's a famous physicist, a Nobel Prize winning physicist, who gave a lecture in 1974 at the California Institute of Technology, actually a commencement address in which he beseeched the students to bend over backwards, not to fool themselves, and to retain utter honesty.
Mhm.
Okay, utter honesty. And I find that that is not the prevailing attitude today. And that's what I'm fighting against,
Mhm.
basically, to have an economics that one can say is utterly honest.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so as our listeners know, I have my standard sign-off questions, and we will put links in our show notes, but where can listeners find you, follow your work, or read more about you?
On the internet, I have a wiki page, and I have some other other addresses that I will share with you, and they can look me up there. They can also write to me at john.komlos@gmail.com, and I'd be glad to hear from them. But also look at my textbook. It's really eye-opening, I think, and it's worthwhile.
Hmm.
Worthwhile also for graduate students, by the way, for ideas to explore further in their research.
Hmm. Absolutely. That's, yeah, that's wonderful advice, really, because I know, grad students often need that little push
Yeah,
for that.
yeah.
And once they
New
end there.
ideas, new ideas.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I want to end our discussion with looking forward. And I know this is a difficult question. I get it. But what do you envision the future of social economics looks like?
Well, I think it'll overtake mainstream economics
Hmm.
because we have a dysfunctional government. Okay? We have an antiquated constitution, an economy that does not deliver for scores of millions of people. So there will be a lot of work ahead for social economists to replace the neoclassical economics by showing simply that the emperor has no clothes. That's their that's their task for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like ending on that air of optimism. And with that, I would just like you so thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Komlos. It was very, very interesting.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks so much. Hope we keep in touch.
Yes, absolutely.